Hello, my dear audience. Greetings from the Mausoleum's Embrace broadcast, the show where we listen to the echoes and reject the nonsensical claim that the dead are silent. I'll be your host for this terrific evening. Now please, find a dark room, settle down into the fetal position, and close your eyes as I read from the wonderful history book of Fear and Horror. Fear is ancient and powerful. There really is nothing quite like the emotion that has been so constant that it has shaped reality itself as it fueled the evolution of humanity. What a go-getter fear is. When was the last time you felt fear? The real fear that unlocks the primal part of your brain, that increases your heart rate, accelerates your breathing, and fixes your short attention span to unblinkingly search for danger. Have you ever wondered why? Why do I react this way when I'm afraid? Why can't I breathe steadily in the dark? Why does this happen to me? Well, my dear friend, when your brain senses danger, it doesn't hesitate to aid you. A process is triggered the moment you subconsciously sense danger. This releases an animalistic part of your brain. Your heart races, blood pressure surges, and breathing quickens, flooding your muscles with oxygenated blood while your body diverts energy to the immediate threat. Your ancient ancestors, facing the raw terrors of their existence, the gnawing hunger, the killer beasts, the fathomless unknown, honed these instincts as their first and last line of defense. Now you are left with that same imprint of survival. Your brain wants more than you do to survive. How useful! These instantaneous reactions, honed over millennia, prepared your ancestors to either confront the terror head-on or flee into the darkness. Because in those heart-stopping moments, waiting for their conscious mind to fully assess the danger could mean reacting a few deadly seconds too late. Fear then became intertwined with the very hope of survival, a visceral guide passed down through generations. And now, that ancestral vigilance lives within you, a silent guardian in your DNA. The reason for that sudden tension in the cinema, that held breath in the echoing hallway, that split-second swerve away from the precipice. It is from this very bedrock of shared experience, this innate understanding of danger and the desperate need to survive, that humanity's oldest stories began to bloom. Warnings whispered in the darkness, tales of what lurked beyond the firelight. Oral tradition, folklore, and terrifying stories that have spread across cultures, time, and space have grown through the power of communication, forging a collection of understanding to fear the shadows. This is the birth of the horror genre. With time and the evolution of cultures, what was once a vital warning between those who had to face the unknown has turned into a wonderful evening. We love being frightened, reading a thrilling book, going to see a bloody talkie at the cinema, and listening to the radio lure you into the lull of suspense. Fear, in the modern centuries, has been delightful. Oh, to feel the rush of adrenaline as our brains convince us of danger, and the dopamine spike right after, as we are reassured of our safety. From abject horror to the zombie apocalypse, let us carve our way through history and understand how we've settled into our current understanding of the world of linguistic horror. But first, let's hear a message from one of our sponsors, Claire's Spectacles. Are you seeing blurred shapes out of the corner of your eye? Do shadowy figures line your hallways? Or have you noticed slight glitches in the fabric of reality? Perhaps it is not what haunts your halls, but what hinders your very sight. Go down to your nearest Claire's Spectacles and pick out a brand new pair of the most crystal clear glasses this side of the abyss. Don't tell them we sent you. Again, go to the nearest clearest spectacles to get the best sight for the best price. My dear listeners, it is such a shame that there were so many thousands of years before humanity had a written language. However, it is so fortunate that the oral tradition of many of your ancestors kept the darkest of knowledge and whispers alive until they could be recorded. As you now know, the first horror stories were your ancestors trying to communicate to each other about the secrets of the dark. Oral traditions allowed for the beginning of understanding the world to be passed down. Religious beliefs about spirits, tricksters that would lure you into the dark, how nature ruled the world, and where our souls go to be tormented when we die. I must say though, thankfully, the Sumerians came along. What a lovely group of people. Truly quite charming. They developed what we believe to be the first written language. These are people who knew how to feel fear. One of my favorite proverbs of theirs is, "When the sun is setting outside so that you cannot even recognize the hand in front of you, go indoors." This amazing civilization even gave us our first horror story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a thrilling tale about the journey of that tyrannical demigod Gilgamesh and his bond with the wild Enkidu that leads him to a violent clash with the monstrous forest guardian Humbaba, a transgression that unleashes divine wrath and the agonizing decay of Enkidu's life, plunging Gilgamesh into a frantic, grief-stricken quest to escape his own inevitable demise. His journey through shadowy realms and encounters with grotesque figures culminates in a crushing realization of death's inescapable grip, a terrifying truth symbolized by a stolen chance at immortality snatched away by a serpent, leaving the king to return to his mighty city, not with eternal life, but with the chilling acceptance of his fleeting existence against the vast, uncaring darkness. The ancient Greeks, Egyptians, and many other cultures followed suit with the horrifying stories that feared the rage of their gods, mythical monsters of nature and death. I could do an entire episode on the plethora of different underworlds and concepts of the living dead. Should I, my dear listeners? Oh well, I digress. As civilizations grew, fears remained constant. The fears of sickness, death, warnings of what displeased the gods, and trying to understand how the indescribable Mother Nature worked. So much of humanity was ruled by the myths and fears of its own creation. Unfortunately, the world of science brings its own horrors. Wait, hold on. I hear someone coming. Let's switch to a message from one of our sponsors. My friends, have your recent endeavors left your hands feeling less than pristine? Do you find that the dirt under your fingernails is staining? Perhaps a certain residue proves stubborn to the ordinary washing? Then good people, you understand the need for a cleanser that truly meets your needs. Allow me to introduce you to Opal Suds. This soap is one of a kind. Opal Suds are not just for the mundane grime of everyday life. Oh no, sir. Opal Suds is formulated for the more demanding tasks. The kind of tasks that loiter between life and death. For example, has your recent invocation left behind a less than savory trace? Did your latest artistic expression involve pigments of a particularly lifelike consistency? Or perhaps the aftermath of a truly illuminating ritual requires a more thorough cleansing? Opal Suds has you covered. It can wash away any stain that you could dream of. So why don't you... Hello, I am back, my dear audience. I hope you do find yourself at your nearest store with opal soaps. Now where was I? Humanity continues forward despite your frailty due to your numbers, resilience, and your ability to feel fear. While the beauty that is the oral tradition was still alive and well during the 18th and 19th centuries, humanity was rapidly evolving, and novels gained significant popularity during this time. During these chaotic 200 years, the darkness in the hearts of humanity truly blossomed. My friends, these were the years that your ancestors learned to be afraid of what was most important to be afraid of: each other. Now, humanity has always had human sacrifices, murder, and killing for land, money, or power. But now cultures were evolving. You knew better than to kill your neighbor. It was widespread knowledge that it was a very terrible thing to do, especially in the late 1800s society. These 2 centuries were filled with the fears of homosexuality, oh dear, feminine sexuality and empowerment, oh my, and more serious concerns such as illness, social and economic instability, invasion and colonization. Oh, the list goes on. It does appear that the monarchy situation during these centuries was giving it the old college try and failing spectacularly. And, my sweet listeners, things only got worse when humanity developed its beloved science. For so long, humanity had grown to fear their gods, but now they were learning to fear science, a new god in its own right. To give you a bit of context for these 2 centuries, there were 2 conflicting movements of belief. The Enlightenment, which, to generalize, pushed forward the belief of justice and innovation, believing that the old archaic ways of terrible hygiene and monarchs could be over and gone. Romanticism, which, again, to generalize, rose up in opposition, fearing that this new way of thinking would create an oppressive and conformative society. Romantics wanted to focus on the individual, God, and nature. Now that I've set the stage, I would be remiss if I didn't cover what many consider to be the first horror novel. The Castle of Otranto by Horatio Walpole. To keep it brief, it is a twisted narrative about a particularly unpleasant fellow, Manfred, who is obsessed with having an heir. His son dies on his wedding day as he's crushed by a giant helmet that fell from the sky. Determined to have an heir due to a prophecy, he decides to make a move on his son's fiancée, Isabella. Being absolutely horrified and uninterested in being sexually assaulted, she runs away with a servant, Theodore. The rest of the book is filled with other supernatural occurrences, dread, and terror, all while the tyrannical Manfred hunts down poor Isabella. Truly a terrific read. In this novel, Walpole expresses a lot of the common fears during this time period about the supernatural, a declining faith in the aristocracy, and unjust authority, as well as the fear of confinement, entrapment, violent passion, and uncontrolled emotion. Folks, when I tell you that these were the centuries that quaked in their little shoes at the fear of anything sensual in public, I'm not kidding. They were especially afraid of homoerotic shenanigans. This brings us to another delightful novel, Carmilla, by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, in 1872. This novel further explores these themes of sensuality, as well as the fears of same-sex relations. In the novel, a seductive female vampire, Carmilla, charms her way into the home of a young Englishwoman by the name of Laura. She acts in ways that can certainly be perceived as romantic, and drains her of her blood at night. It predates Dracula by Bram Stoker by nearly 20 years, but both of these novels have the very real theme of an aversion to female sexuality, as well as the fear of homoeroticism and lack of control. The Enlightenment was challenging traditional hierarchies and traditional values, and there was nothing more frightening than that to the European world. Or, I should say, the members of the European world who didn't have to worry as much about money, disease, or the slow but sure approach of death. Fortunately, Science was helping out on that last front. Unfortunately, the Romantics had reason to fear that as well. Now, as your host, I promise to not take up too much of your time, but I will admit that Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is an intense favorite of mine. Frankenstein is such a perfect example of the fears of enlightenment. The horror of playing God to reverse the natural law of the world, the little doctor who creates a monster in an attempt to achieve immortality, the warped sense of human evolution, and the murder of innocents in revenge for being ostracized. All of it a symbol for the destruction that so many romantics feared. Truly lovely. I insist you read it for yourself. There's nothing quite like knowing the impending doom of every character in a book and feeling the suspense anyways. Oh, it appears it is time for a word from our sponsor. You haven't fallen asleep on me, have you? Dear neighbors, do you find your nights troubled? Is the fear of inching closer to the unfeeling darkness of slumber keeping you awake at night? Good people, we have your solution. The scientists at the Slumber Mill have worked tirelessly to bring you a perfect night's rest. Through a series of perfectly legal, albeit not quite FDA-approved chemicals, one dose of the Slumber Mill's blend will melt away reality into a remarkably deep slumber. Unlike the typical over-the-counter brands of sleep aids, Slumber Mill's formula works with a firm but gentle persuasion. Get your Slumber Mill tonic at Oh! Welcome back, my lovely listeners. I hadn't noticed your return. Forgive me. Let's continue, shall we? This will be the most difficult, rapidly evolving century to cover, as the 1900s were jam-packed full of history that rapidly influenced the horror genre. So I shall be as quick as I can for you. Let's start with the 1900s. Early in the century, authors like Arthur Machen, who wrote The Great God Pan, tapped into anxieties about the unsettling discoveries of science and the fragility of the Victorian worldview, suggesting ancient hidden horrors beneath the surface of reality. H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man explored the terrifying potential of scientific advancement and social breakdown. Early cinema also emerged, and with it the first horror films. These often drew from established Gothic literature, Frankenstein, or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This disrupts what the horror genre has been for so long. Written novels, or word-of-mouth horror stories. Moving on to the 1910s, World War I starts on July 28th in 1914 and officially ends on November 11th, 1918. This introduces the fear of societal breakdown, trauma, and the monstrous nature of humanity. The rise of anxieties about foreign threats and social upheaval begins to seep into horror narratives. The aftermath of World War I profoundly impacted literature. While not strictly horror in the monster sense, works exploring shell shock, the dehumanization of war, and the loss of innocence carried a strong undercurrent of psychological terror. Authors like Algernon Blackwood continue to explore cosmic and psychological horror, often reflecting a sense of unease with the changing world. Next up, we have a particularly favorite year of mine, the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties and the subsequent Great Depression saw anxieties about social change, economic collapse, and the fragility of the American dream. Horror reflected this with themes of decadence, hidden evils, and desperate circumstances leading to monstrous acts. The most significant figure of the 1920s horror was H.P. Lovecraft. His tales, such as The Call of Cthulhu and the Dunwich Horror, moved away from traditional Gothic monsters towards vast, indifferent, cosmic entities and ancient, unknowable horrors that dwarfed human concerns. This reflected a growing unease with humanity's place in the universe, fueled by scientific advancements that revealed the vastness and potential meaninglessness of existence. Then, in the 1930s, The Great Depression fueled anxieties about poverty and societal collapse, which sometimes manifested in horror through desperate characters and bleak settings. The rise of fascism in Europe also began to create a sense of external threat that would later be explored more directly. And, of course, my dear listeners, we must discuss the emergence of radio. With the shadow of the Depression and looming global conflict, shows like Lights Out, especially during its early, gorier run, and The Witch's Tale, often tapped into primal fears of the unknown, the grotesque, and the supernatural forces that mirrored the instability and uncertainty of the Great Depression. Characters faced desperate situations and monstrous entities that could be seen as allegories for the era's hardships and anxieties about a looming global conflict. In 1938, the War of the Worlds broadcast, Orson Welles' infamous broadcast perfectly captured the pervasive fear of invasion and societal collapse that was growing as tensions rose in Europe. The realistic portrayal of a Martian invasion triggered widespread panic, demonstrating the public's underlying anxieties about external threats and the fragility of their world. I almost feel bad for the listeners, but I know I would have loved to feel the horrifying doom of reality as we know it. What an experience! Then, World War II and the Holocaust in the 1940s brought real-life horrors that dwarfed fictional ones. However, some horror of this era, like Dennis Wheatley's occult thrillers, subtly reflected anxieties about hidden enemies and powerful, malevolent forces at play in the world. Radio shows like Suspense and the later more psychological iterations of Lights Out often reflected the trauma and anxieties of wartime. Themes of betrayal, paranoia, the blurred lines between good and evil, and the psychological toll of conflict found their way into these narratives. The fear of the enemy, both foreign and unseen, permeated the airwaves. In the 1950s, the Cold War and the Atomic Age directly inspired science fiction horror. Novels like Richard Matheson's I Am Legend in 1954 and The Shrinking Man in 1956 explored fears of nuclear annihilation, societal breakdown, and the terrifying implications of scientific advancement. What's new? Alien invasion narratives like Jack Finney's The Body Snatchers mirrored anxieties about communist infiltration and the loss of individuality. The terror of nuclear annihilation and the Red Scare fueled a new wave of horror, often blended with science fiction. Programs like X-1 and Dimension X explored anxieties about scientific hubris, alien invasion as a metaphor for communist infiltration, and the horrifying possibilities of a post-apocalyptic world ravaged by atomic weapons. Even seemingly supernatural shows sometimes carried undertones of paranoia, hidden threats mirroring Cold War tensions. In the 1960s, the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, and widespread social unrest led to a grittier, more socially conscious horror. Films began to explore the darkness within humanity and reflect the anxieties of a society grappling with profound change and violence. The social and political turmoil of the 1960s led to a grittier, more transgressive horror. Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby tapped into anxieties about changing social norms, the vulnerability of women, and hidden cults within seemingly normal society. In the 1970s, the disillusionment of the post-Vietnam era and the rise of true crime influenced a darker, more realistic horror. Stephen King's early works, like Carrie and The Shining, explored the terror within ordinary people and the breakdown of the family unit. The slasher novel also gained popularity, reflecting fears of random violence. Then, in the 1980s, the AIDS crisis brought a new wave of body horror and anxieties about disease. Authors like Clive Barker, John Skipp, and Craig Spector were key figures. They pushed the boundaries of visceral horror, often reflecting the era's social and sexual anxieties. A significant trend was the rise of splatterpunk, which emphasized extreme gore, graphic violence, and visceral description. This reflected a desensitization to violence in media and a desire for more intense and shocking scares. merely the start to the end of humans growing up squeamish. In the 1990s, the end of the Cold War brought new anxieties about global instability and the rise of domestic terrorism. Horror explained themes of social alienation, the breakdown of community, and the lingering psychological scars of past traumas, often through more psychological and character-driven narratives. Fears about societal fragmentation, urban decay, and the lingering effects of past traumas were explored in horror novels. The rise of the internet also began to introduce new anxieties about technology and the blurring lines between reality and the virtual world, though this would become more prominent in later decades. Following the success of The Silence of the Lambs, there was a continued fascination with the darkness within humanity. Novels explored the psychology of serial killers and other human predators, often drawing inspiration from the burgeoning true crime genre and reflecting anxieties about the seemingly random nature of violence in society. Examples include Thomas Harrison's Hannibal and the early work of John Connolly. It appears I have just found a letter from my producer's crypt telling me we don't have much time left. He's already been gone a year, and yet he still finds ways to bother me in death. Oh well. Let's take a quick minute to hear some words from a sponsor while we still can. The hill you live next to. It beckons. Go to it. Alrighty folks, we're back. I don't know why I said that. I never stopped talking, did I? Strange. I'll have to go back and edit that. I digress, my good friends. Let's continue talking about the modern age of horror. We've got plenty to discuss. At this point, horror films have completely impacted how we understand horror. The way that we feel fear at its specific music, the heightened amount of gore and psychological elements that need to be in play in order to leave your audience engaged. At this point, horror films have completely impacted how we understand horror. From the way that we feel fear at specific music to the heightened amount of gore and psychological elements that need to be in play in order to leave your audience engaged. Are you engaged? Should I kick things up a notch? Yes, that's better. Now, as I was saying, psychological horror. Humans evolved from understanding that soap is quite useful in the pursuit of not dying, to getting a firm grasp on what makes your weird, horrifying brains function. There is true understanding, and with understanding, as we have seen, only brings a new layer of fear to be explored. Novels of today reflect the anxieties of the evolving cultural landscape of a new millennium, shaped by our rapid technological advances, global conflicts, and shifting social paradigms. They often move beyond traditional monster tropes to explore more nuanced and deeply unsettling themes, frequently delving into the complexities of the human psyche and the horrors of the real world. Mark C. Daniel Whiskey's House of Leaves was written in the 2000s and has been an absolute pleasure to read. It truly is a seminal work of experimental horror that uses unconventional narrative structures and typography to create a deeply disorienting and psychologically unsettling experience, mirroring the labyrinth nature of the haunted house at its center. I implore you to take a peek when you get the chance. A more recent example is S.A. Barnes' Dead Silence, written in 2022. This novel traps a communications officer on a derelict spaceship with a potentially hostile presence. The horror unfolds through her isolation, paranoia, and the unraveling of the ship's dark secrets, playing heavily on psychological tension and the fear of the unknown in a confined space. Thrilling! There have been endless novels on isolation, the fear of technology, and the deep haunting of being trapped within one's body. And these are only two examples. Radio has unfortunately died down a bit in popularity, However, there is a wonderful new thing called the internet. Horror has never been so accessible. A funny little thing officially called a podcast in 2005 started to gain popularity, and as with any form of human evolution, we gained the horror version alongside it. Pseudopod, the Drabblecast, and 19 Nocturne Boulevard each work as audio horror magazines with short episodic tales of horror with each listen, incredibly charming and easy to digest. Just like the older radio shows from the 1930s and 50s. However, now it is easily accessible from anywhere at any time. Horror in film has influenced how we interpret music. The slow sound of haunting piano, dissonant harmonies, unusual rhythms, and unsettling instrumentation, along with the fascinating sound effects of ripping, stabbing, the light switch flickering off, the sounds of thousands of little slimy spiders hovering right next to your ear, or even the steady, slow steps that you don't know the source of, are all wired into our brains as things to be afraid of. Each sound heightening the fear felt in this modern world of podcasts. And oh my, don't even get me started on internet horror. A short story spread on the internet to hundreds of thousands of people all over the world who enjoy dark narratives. Made popular by creepypastas, a little play on the words creepy, copy, and paste. How delightful! The generally accepted first creepypasta is often cited as Ted the Caver in 2001. A blog-style narrative that blurred the lines between fiction and reality, a key characteristic of early creepypasta. These stories were typically short, text-based, and shared anonymously on forum platforms, focusing on unsettling personal anecdotes and urban legends, reflecting the rapid and easily accessible life in the 21st century. As humanity continues to evolve, I'm sure there will be new venues of fear that we will get the thrilling chance to uncover. I cannot wait. For now, we'll just have to endure the crushing weight of time in order to see what will be around the corner. Welcome to the end! Have you survived the broadcast? How delightful! You should be proud. I hope this night has been filled with entertainment and education. I implore you to continue digging into the graves of history on your own, or joining me on my next excavation here within the Mausoleum's embrace. Have a wonderful night and pleasant nightmares. The Mausoleum's Embrace is brought to you by the Void Records Broadcasting and Publishing Company. None of the sponsorships are real in this dimension of reality.